The United States is the largest incarcerator in the world. We have only 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's inmates. And in the U.S., more than 750,000 people are released from state and federal prisons every year. What are the barriers that hamper their reentry progress? How does the pretrial system affect African Americans in particular? What role does politics play? The goal of the Clarion Call is prison prevention. We work to keep you on this side of the bars. Grab your pen and paper, listen up, and find out why.
17 years ago, when I decided to become a mentor, that I was assigned to Christina. When she was in the first grade, she was a shy little girl, not able to smile much.
Elaine showed there were people out there to help me and guide me through life. When Elaine let me read her diary, I didn't even realize how important I was to her. And now that I'm mentoring, I feel that importance, and I can spread those same values to the girls I mentor.
Be someone who matters to someone who matters.
Hello and welcome to the Clarion Call Show. I'm Janice Liggins, your host. Joining us today are three distinguished experts in the mass incarceration arena. First, we have Dr. Charles Adams, Associate Professor, Department of Criminal Justice, Bowie State University. We also have Dr. Jerome Schiele, Dean, College of Professional Studies, Bowie State University as well. And we have the recently retired Wendell France, Deputy Secretary, Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I am so excited to have you with us, particularly as it relates to this topic on mass incarceration. As I said, you all know a lot more than I do, so I'm very happy to have you here to shed a little light on what the challenges are. We just said that the United States is the largest incarcerator in the world. The United States also has longer sentences for the same crime than other countries do. And when we say the largest incarcerator in the world, we mean by a long shot, not close, even more than third world countries. What do you think you can attribute any of that to? What other factors have you, from a global perspective, have you seen that it relates to the United States and our mass incarceration?
I think one of the issues that we see in the United States that maybe the rest of the world not necessarily have to deal with was looking at prison more as an economic boom. We call it the prison industrial complex. And so many of our inmates going in, it's nothing more than, say, a product that people are making money off of. And so the more prisoners we have going into the system, the more money that people are making off of those inmates.
Well, that prison industrial complex, as you say, ever since prisons have been privatized, I think that's where it all started.
Correct.
Back in the 80s, when the privatization of prisons came about. And since then, prison growth rates have grown over 500% in that 30 years, basically, as you say, Dr. Adams, because of money.
Correct.
Because now, when we say money, who's making that money? The prison companies are traded on Wall Street. And
yeah, well, the privatization of prisons has become a big phenomenon. And now prisoners have become a commodity.
Exactly.
But that's pretty consistent to me in the history of the United States. The United States begins with a history of enslavement, violence. It has a strong history of punishment, and even back in the 19th century, the poor were placed in workhouses and were punished. So given the experience of slavery and violence, and then also the overlay of American capitalism, then it makes sense that privatization would be the outcome. Marginalization of prisoners and converting them really into a commodity and really using their labor. It's really exploitation of labor to produce very low-cost goods and services. So to me, it's consistent with the history of the country.
And ever since around the 80s, when we had the war on drugs, and you couple war on drugs with privatization of prisons, and then there's a war on drugs, but then the floodgates are opened for drugs to come into our country, you really have the perfect storm set up for the beginnings of mass incarceration. You get rid of programs that help to treat, like drug treatment programs, and instead of treatment, you start punishing. Instead of help, you start to punish. And all of this has led to an increase in the incarceration rates, but more importantly, this thing about Wall Street. With Corrections Corporation of America, the largest privately run company in the world, is traded on Wall Street.
Correct.
And if we're not careful, if we have portfolios on Wall Street, we may be investing
Correct.
in the very organization that is.
Correct, but in Maryland, we don't have the influx of private prisons. We do have a mixture of that perfect storm. We have to keep in mind that Maryland made a conscious decision in the 80s to begin closing its mental hospitals. So we're closing mental hospitals at the same time that we're criminalizing people for conduct that comes out of not having good mental health support. And then we have the war on drugs, and then we have the crack epidemic, and then we have this need to expand the number of public prison beds that we're building, because we see this expansion of folks coming into the city, particularly from Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Prince George's County. So while Maryland doesn't have a history of managing private prisons, we're still part of the process in which we're trying to manage that influx of individuals coming into the system for a variety of reasons. Often, not all of them are violent offenders. Most of these folks who are coming in are nonviolent offenders who have a variety of instances where they've run afoul of the law, and they're getting very stiffer sentences when they're coming in.
But the fact that the nonviolent offender is getting long periods of sentencing. Now that alone, we have not innocent people, they committed some kind of an offense, but not 10 years worth, not 20 years worth, and they're mixed in with some of the violence, some of the murders, or the rapists. Is that the case?
Well, our system believes that we should punish. I'm not saying that's what I believe, but our communities where our offenders come from, there's a belief that we need to have the system of punishment. And we never seem to be able to draw the line between where punishment should stop and where we begin to restore people so that they can return to the community as law-abiding citizens. So until we have some real discussions amongst ourselves and our communities about what we expect the system to do, we will continue to try to make sure people are punished, when oftentimes punishment should not be in the equation.
At all.
At all.
At all. At all. Yes, when those folk are in jails or in prison, and then they begin to come out. I mentioned in the opening, 750,000 people are released every year, but yet there are major barriers in a lot of cases to their successful reentry. And in some cases, even in Maryland, those who come out are not able to get any type of social services. They're restricted from all types of supports that would help them. What have you seen as it relates to reentry challenges?
Well, the resources that folk would need coming back into the community feeds into that punishment piece. So we punish them where they can't get public assistance. We make sure that they can't get certain types of jobs. Up until recently, we ensured that they couldn't vote. We attach to that punishment philosophy certain types of restrictions that allows you to never become whole again.
Never.
And then we talk about what we expect people to do after they come home. If a person receives a sentence from a judge and that person goes off and does what the system expects them to do, then we should pretty much say, okay, that's it. Mm-hmm. He's done. He's provided. He did what he or she has done what we've asked them to do. Now we can allow them to be restored back to who they were before this incident happened. But that's not how the system works. Secondly, there's not one seamless reentry process throughout our system in Maryland. There are systems that are good, some are bad, but they're not consistent, and that's based on resources because the local government oftentimes is the one that has to underwrite the cost of reentry, even though they're coming back from state facilities. And so there's a much broader discussion that has to occur. Some of that is going on now in our state legislature about how we develop another system that really is more efficient and more effective in managing folks who are returning to the communities, but also in who goes to prison. In the beginning, who really goes to prison, and that's a discussion that we really have to have a lot of dialogue around.
Agreed, because some of those restrictions not only affect the person coming out, it affects their loved ones. If they have someone who's receiving social support, then they can't even live with that person, or the person loses their support. So it's really a clamp down. It's a very tight process to make sure that they don't get the kind of supports they need. And whatever we need to do to look at those types of things, I think it's awesome.
But the public also supports this punishment model. When you look at some of the polls, nationally and locally, people support the punishment model. They really believe that they really don't believe in positive human transformation, that the person is in jail for the right reason and therefore they should be punished perpetually. So it's difficult to kind of change the model if the public is not with you.
I believe the public, we tend to believe what we see most often. And so when you have the same message coming at you over and over and over, they need to be punished, they need to be punished, they need to be punished, then you believe, okay, they need to be punished. So I think the whole mindset will be changed because the messaging has to change. And I think that's something that we really do need to take a much closer look at. What role does politics play in this?
I think politics plays a huge role. When you look at the beginning of mass incarceration, this was an idea or a brainchild of Nixon. Coming out of the 60s, you had upheaval in major cities, Newark, Detroit, LA, you had the riots, you had the 1968 presidential convention. And so Nixon and his cabinet decided, we're gonna run on law and order. And so, that began the propaganda. So it's, when you look at what Nixon contributed to the discussion, even to label it a war, you have to have combatants. And so this is almost the beginning of the second Civil War because you have citizens turning on citizens. And so now you have people that you have deemed combatants and people that are not worthy to be in society. And so there were many policies and programs that Nixon put in place that really began this mass incarceration or this so-called war on crime and drugs.
And it's only been perpetuated because of this Wall Street. You're making money off of locking up folk. And so the more money they can make, the more they're going to continue that realm, that trend. And so I think we're going to have a lot more discussion when we come back, but right now we're going to take a quick break. There's much more to come, so please stay with us.
It's 3 p.m. For 50 million kids across America, school's out. And for a third of these kids, they're out on their own. Out with nowhere to go. Out with nothing to do. Out all afternoon when anything can happen. But every afternoon is a chance to change America's future. All you have to do is open the door. It's time to support the Boys and Girls Clubs. Great futures start here.
Welcome back to our conversation on mass incarceration with Dr. Charles Adams, Dr. Jerome Schiele, and Mr. Wendell France. Gentlemen, let's continue with our conversation as it relates to mass incarceration and the family. What impact has it had on the family structure in general?
Well, it's had a major impact to the extent that those who are incarcerated are disproportionately black and brown. We already know that disproportionately many black families are headed by females or mother-only families. Mm-hmm. I hate to use that term, but structurally that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So essentially when predominantly men are incarcerated, then that removes men from the homes. It helps to it unfortunately helps to lead to the decay of the communities. Children oftentimes don't know their father, and of course increasingly women are being incarcerated. Mm-hmm. So it really just had a major disruptive effect on particularly and disproportionately brown and black families. So some people believe that, we talked about the policies before, that some people believe that these policies are intentionally devised to create disruption in the black family and community. And of course, there are others who don't, but again, mass incarceration is one way, one factor to do that.
Some say as well that this war on drugs is a failed policy. Personally, I do not agree with that. Mm-hmm. I think it's been a very successful policy. I think it's worked exceedingly well, which is why you have a 500% increase. Correct. In incarceration rates. It has accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish all the way back in the 80s. It's made a lot of people very wealthy. So it's not a failed policy. And I think we have to just be frank and upfront and truthful about that fact. And there are people who don't want to see these particular programs change because there are folk who are benefiting from it financially. Folk are making money, why change it?
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the benefits, who benefits from this, look at going back to Nixon and the block grants, the millions of dollars flowing in the state and local governments to look at their criminal justice program, to enhance their criminal justice program. So a lot of funding went into a lot of police departments, a lot of correctional facilities. When you build correctional facilities, all those industries around the correctional facilities benefit. Hotel, car dealerships, housing market. So all that indirect benefit. And so, yeah, you can see where they want to continue the policy.
And if they can, just like we say, we believe in punishment, we think it's the right thing to do, that's because of being brainwashed, correct, basically. Because these industries that are built around this industrial complex, if you will, are all making big money. Right. There are trade shows that are huge with people coming from around the country to sell their wares, whether it's bulletproof vest or anything to do with the prison system. I had opportunity to go to Western Maryland to visit a prison. I was with Leadership Maryland, and we took a visit there. And one of the officials at the end of our visit said, we let them out, and they come right back. Like, we don't understand. Well, of course they understand why they come back. There's a tool that you can even use online where you can put in the age, whether the person was male or female, if it was their first offense, how long of a sentence they got, and a couple of other factors, and it will actually calculate for you how long it will be before that person recidivates. So it is a well-documented and well-studied factor that recidivism is predictable depending on what has been taking place. So if we're going to make change, it's possible to make change. We just have to be real and, I think, upfront about the facts and address them head on. One other thing, what other alternatives could there be to incarceration?
Well, drug courts could be one. Particularly, you talked about the non-offender rate, and drug courts it's been shown to be very successful too. Particularly for those who have offenses around the distribution and sale of illicit drugs. So that's one alternative.
And you also see the decriminalization of marijuana. That conversation has really ramped up. And so you see many large jurisdictions having that conversation, making a fine as opposed to a punishable imprisonment. So getting those felons or those people out of the system.
The American Civil Liberties Union, and I'm not necessarily an advocate for the American Civil Liberties Union, but they did a nationwide study on marijuana use. And I'm not an advocate for marijuana use either, but their study was important because it was, they say, the first nationwide study that actually looked at marijuana usage as it relates to black versus white. And the 10-year study. And the study showed that the usage amongst African Americans and whites was very similar. But then when you compare the arrest rates for blacks were 6 times higher than the arrest rates for whites with the same usage pattern. So the decriminalization of marijuana, I think, we have to have it. Not that we want people to smoke marijuana, but we have to have take away the tool.
Right.
Well, it goes a little, for me it's a little deeper than that. I think that when we talk about mass incarceration, when we talk about who's affected, when we talk about what the systems look like, we have to also talk about where it all begins. And most of it begins in our communities. And so the questions that we need to start asking ourselves, particularly in communities with predominant African American populations, is what are we asking the police to do? What directions are we giving the police? What enforcement strategies are we saying that we support them to carry out? Are we managing this, what we used to call a zero tolerance type policing, or are we into some sort of restorative model where we try to hold people harmless for certain offenses? Once you start talking about what the police or local police are doing in our communities, then you can talk about who gets arrested and what they get arrested for, and what does the pretrial system look like, and are we holding disproportionate numbers of people for trial based on some fictional belief that they won't appear at trial, or that we have to attach a money bail to ensure that they show up at trial. And so mass incarceration starts way before a person gets into a court and gets a sentence from a judge. It starts back at that community and what we are asking the police to do, how we are supporting different types of strategies on different types of neighborhoods, and then how do we support that moving forward? What's the prosecutor's position? Are we prosecuting all the juveniles who commit the 14 or 15 categories of offenses as adults, or are we referring those cases back to a juvenile court where there's some other lesser sanction or some other family type intervention that can take place? You know, all of those factors, all of those pinch points feed into this notion of how do we deal with mass incarceration. Maryland now is they looked at reforming the pretrial system. The former governor appointed a commission. They worked on this for about a year. Great deal of representation from a lot of experts. Not a lot came out of that because the report was issued at the end of the former governor's term. And so we saw that while there's unanimity in thought that we need to reform our pretrial system, look at the use of money bails in that system. Not a lot has happened. So you mentioned politics. What does politics do? Where are those state legislators at on that issue, particularly those who participated in that study? We're also looking at the Maryland Reinvestment Commission, worked for about a year with the Pew Charitable Trust on reforming the whole system, Maryland's whole criminal justice system. And they have a series of recommendations that came out of that. Are all those recommendations going to end up in good legislation that comes out of the General Assembly this session? So the community really needs to be aware of some of this, and needs to start looking at some of these issues and asking questions. If we're creating commissions and appointing task force and getting recommendations, then what happens? Then what happens? And if nothing is happening, then are the right people in position in our elected offices to make sure that we are advocating on behalf of those who are most disenfranchised?
Exactly. Speaking of Maryland, though, and you're the best one to ask on this particular situation, what does the inmate population just right here in Maryland look like? I mean, how many prisons does Maryland have, and about how many inmates?
There are 23 correctional facilities that have different security classifications. We have facilities as far east as the Eastern Shore and as far west as Allegheny County. Facilities we would like to think, or when I was there, we'd like to think that they were mission specific, but it's really kind of hard to manage mission specific when the population, you have such an influx of population who have systemic mental health issues that sometimes manifest themselves into substance abuse, because out of a substance abuse comes some sort of mental health issue. And so you have to try to make sure that you place people where they are able to receive some sort of support working towards reentry. Don't misunderstand my position. There are some folks who actually need to be incarcerated and be incarcerated for lengthy periods of time because they're just not able to adjust in community. But the far more folks who are incarcerated that probably would benefit from not being incarcerated. And so that's some of the studies that you looked at. How do we look at getting folks shorter sentences, nonviolent offenders, back in the community, restore some of their rights, get them to working and so forth. So that's a long discussion that has to occur, but we have to have the capacity to want to have the discussion first and then act on some of the research that suggests what we should be doing. There's plenty of research been done on all of these issues, and so I'm glad to be seated here with these two colleagues. There's a lot of work been done to tell us what needs to happen in our systems and how to better manage them and how to reduce costs.
Right, we just need to implement them.
Right, exactly.
Right, a lot of those strategies. And I think another thing, and you mentioned this before, but the mental health community, we really need to expand mental health services because many of the prisoners, many mental health patients end up in prison, and that's a problem. So that's one piece.
I wish we could continue, gentlemen. We can't today, but we shall very soon, okay? Mass incarceration has been a growing epidemic in our country for 30 years. Has it touched your family? If so, join us for an open discussion on mass incarceration April 28th at Bowie State University. We're very happy that Bowie State is co-hosting this event with us. Let your voice be heard and be a part of the solution. You must register to attend this forum, so visit our website, register, and get more information. We also need your financial support. You can do that also online. Visit us at www.theclarioncall.info, I-N-F-O. That's it for now, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time, won't you, for The Clarion Call. Until then, I'm Janice Liggins. Blessings to you.